So imagine that you're watching one of your favorite shows, Stranger Things, Game of Thrones, what have you. And as you're watching, you do one of three things. Either you imagine having your own personal character in the show or whatever, interacting with the other characters. Perhaps maybe you imagine yourself in the show, or maybe you do what most people stay as normal and just actually watch the show. If you do one of the first two things, you might actually enjoy making a character in Dungeons & Dragons. So, a few things just to get out of the way real quick, is just a brief explanation, is that when it comes to dice rolls in the game, there is three parts of the name. The amount of dice you're rolling, D, is signified as a dice roll, and then the size of the dice, being, 3d6 if you're rolling 3 6-sided die. So then, of course, the number of sides being, d6, d8, d10, d12 for the number of sides. And then you roll for certain things, like if you were to say, oh, I want to kick down a door, you would roll for that and see if your character has enough strength to kick down a door. So if you were to start playing the game, you wouldn't have to worry about buying dice because most people would be willing to share with you. Of course, you just want to respect some superstitions that gamers have and ask before you use them. And of course, what I'll show you is just the standard rules in the player's handbook, which is what every player should have. But two popular DMs or dungeon masters who control the game world, being Mark Humes and Matt Mercer, have both suggested to eventually try and go on to some homebrew or player-created things, not official material. So the first set of races that we have for when you're creating your character is dwarf, elf, halfling, and human. Each one has their own unique abilities that makes them different from each other, specifically with humans being good for new players as they're most well-rounded. Of course, that doesn't mean that anything else you shouldn't try because ultimately creatures like halflings have luck. So it's hard for you to get a bad roll when you're rolling a 20-sided die with a halfling. There's also uncommon races, which more specifically goes into creatures that you wouldn't commonly see if you were to play a game. These are dragonborn, gnomes, half-elves, and half-orcs. And creatures like dragonborns, for example, get a unique ability of having a breath weapon, where they can breathe fire or breathe lightning, depending on which color their scales are. Now, if you were to create your race, then you have an option of 12 classes to choose from in the game. These range anywhere from a barbarian, who is specifically strong with heavier weapons, and are better at really being a damage dealer with their large health pools, or a fighter who's very well rounded with everything. A good starting point for most players because you can pick up anything, you can use it. There's also options like monks, who their greatest weapon is their fist. There's also paladins, if you were to try and do some role playing and pretend to be like sort of like a priest or whatever, who is very strong. Rogues, your assassins, and rangers, your archers. There's also magic casters, which are wizards, warlocks, and sorcerers for the arcane casters. Each respectively being a wizard, learns their magic through study. A warlock makes a pact with an unholy patron, sort of bargaining with Satan, for example. And a sorcerer, who is born into magic. There's also alternatives of bard, druids, and clerics. Bards are, as you'd expect, they have instruments and they get to kind of play songs to cast their spells. Druids are creatures of nature. They cast nature magic. They can also become animals through their magic. And clerics, similar to the paladins, but more magic focused. They also follow a deity, but they focus less on physical strength and more on magic strength. Now, there are 6 stats in Dungeons & Dragons. This is just a little statistics of who plays what class. Now, of course, if you were to pick up the game, you can choose anything. It's just that you can see that most people choose to play a human fighter, as it is the most just simple and well-rounded character. So there are also some there are some stats to your characters. These are kind of measures of your character's abilities, with strength being very self-explanatory. It's how hard can you knock down a wall. Dexterity being things like your character's balance. You know, could you balance on a tightrope to get away from something? And Constitution, just kind of being your willpower. If you have a lot of Constitution, it might be hard to knock you down in a fight. Or maybe you could get hit by a poisonous arrow and not suffer any ill effects. Following that are the mental stats. Intelligence is just a measure of your intellect. If you were to read a book, how long could you remember what was specifically on the third page of it? Wisdom kind of being, how well can you perceive the world? And charisma being how eloquent you are. Maybe how silver is your tongue. Obviously, giving presentations like this does require a lot of charisma. Otherwise, have a hard time. And for each charisma or for each ability you have, there's a number that goes along with it. These numbers range anywhere from 1 to 30, 10 being the average. A good way to think of it is that all of us in this room would probably have straight 10s across all of us, because none of us are particularly great in anything super extraordinary yet, as we're all just teenagers. But with something like an athlete at the school, you might have an 11 or a 12 because you're specifically stronger with athletics. And before we get into the real meat of what goes into creating a character, is things like your armor class and your weapons. With armor class, it's something you have to beat when you want to hit someone. So if you want to, for example, take your bow and arrow and you want to shoot someone, they would have a specific armor class, which is how strong their armor is. And you have to beat that for sake of role-playing to see if your arrow was able to hit them or if it flew next to them. And then, of course, for your weapons, you have melee weapons, which use strength and dexterity as options if it's specified, and then the inverse of that for ranged weapons, where you use dexterity unless it is specified that you can use strength. And then, lastly, when it comes to creating a character, there's 6 main questions that you should ask yourself when you're really trying to create the plot. So these are thanks to Begging Battalion RPG, a YouTuber, and he went into great detail about how much you can really create out of these questions. First one being, where is your character born? In the example of Call of Cthulhu, which is a Victorian-era tabletop RPG, you could say that your character was born in England, and that lets you kind of get some groundwork going. So perhaps were they born in England, or were they born in the marshes of some Amazonian jungle? Who are your parents? And are they still alive? This could, of course, make a lot of effort into a lot of impact on what your character is. If your parents are still alive and your character perhaps younger, perhaps what you can make with your character's goals is to maybe pay off a house payment that your family has, or maybe they're in debt to some mafia.
You can please stay if you can. If not, you can continue. We'll just go to
You can choose what your character is doing before their adventure. So if your character was, for example, a librarian, you could say, okay, that makes them have a lot of high intelligence because they, spend a lot of time around their books. And why would they leave that life? If your character was a librarian, perhaps they caught word in one of their books about an ancient treasure that was in some long forgotten world, and that's why you want to leave. What your character left behind could be like the home they left behind. If they go on this great adventure, you wouldn't just go pack up and go fight a dragon. There'd be some family you leave behind, or home, or a previous life. And lastly, what does your character want? Some motivations. No adventurer really just wants to go out into the world just to fight things. It might be something that you want to get a nice pile of gold so you can afford a nice living place, or simply the lore. You want to become a great hero and be remembered for years to come. And that covers the basics of what goes into making a character in Dungeons & Dragons. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Adam.